It's too late. Nothing changes. There's no point fighting anymore. I've heard this voice very often. It's quiet, resigned, weary, a little cynical. It's a voice that doesn't yell or scream. It's one that shrugs and turns away. It looks down at the ground or up at the sky and simply says, "Why bother?" And truthfully, I think it's quite understandable. I've felt this way myself many times. If you look at the problems of the world and you see the scale of change needed, it just feels astronomical. Institutions seem immovable, people in leadership seem interminably inadequate, and history seems to show that nothing really shifts, or only rarely by comparison, despite protests, pleas, and prayers. So, what else are we meant to feel? And here is the quiet grief that so many people carry over a world that seems resistant to healing and good intentions or actions. But beneath it, there can lie the seeds of a return to the power we all still have. And that's the subject I want to explore in today's episode of the Higher Self Dialogues with me, your host, Anton Jarrett. Facing systemic power feels like standing at the base of a mountain so vast that the peak disappears into the clouds. Governments that never listen, and new parties that only prove to be the same or worse than the rest in the political area, of course. Corporations that grow unchecked, and their leaders growing fat off the work of us minions who create value for them that widens the gaps between us. Cultural movements that harden into ideology. No footholds, no handrails, just an infernal climb and monstrous, insurmountable scale. And this is where disaffection creeps in. Not loudly, but gradually. People stop voting, stop hoping. They retreat inward, not in a meditative way, but as a defeat, because where do you begin when the beginning seems 1,000 miles away, when the problem you think you are tackling is only ever the tip of a many-headed iceberg? But then I think what deepens, or what can deepen, the despair is this: we measure our power by its visible results. And in a world where the problems are vast, layered and interwoven, that metric in particular always fails us. We expect a certain scale or outcome. We want to see the needle move, and when it doesn't, we assume we failed or that the effort was pointless. But what if measuring impact that way is the fault? What if that's the faulty element in all of this? What if the value of our effort doesn't lie in what it changes out there, but in what aligns within? Maybe the tragedy isn't that change is slow. Maybe it's that we've forgotten how to honor the unseen shifts that are already in motion. That even as systems resist, something in us is becoming more real, more rooted, and that matters. I think hope gets a bad reputation often. It's typically mistaken for wishful thinking, naivety, kind of sugar-coated denial of reality. But real hope isn't sweet. It's actually bitter and hard-won, and it rises from both the heart and the mind despite everything, despite the odds, despite the failures, despite the fact that we may never see the outcome. You see, hope is a spiritual muscle, I feel. And we don't use it when things are going well. We use it when everything says give up. And still, you then say, no, not yet. This kind of hope isn't passive. It's active. It's a commitment, a stance, a refusal to let the world write the story for you. And it's not denying darkness, that things are bad. It's actually acknowledging they exist and putting a light on them. And yet, I don't think most of us were ever really taught this. We were sold the idea that hope means outcomes, that if you try hard enough, you wish hard enough, hope for the best, that you'll win, that light always triumphs. But the mystics knew better than that, actually, that we can and we can learn a lot from them. They knew that hope is a way of being, not a strategy for guaranteeing success. Another way to look at the landscape is this. It's not that we've run out of hope, or that there is a landscape of despair, or that there are no longer things to hope for. It's more, I think, that our current version of hope no longer fits the shape of the world. Hope isn't broken, but does need to be reconfigured, less as a belief in specific outcomes and more as an openness to possibility, not probability, which we often think that that's what it is, but it's possibility, the kind that admits life still holds unknown evolutions, that meaning can move beneath the surface, even when nothing seems to move above it, that we might still grow into what the moment quietly asks of us, even if that moment is silent in return. So there's a call here to live by faith too, not in fantasies or make-believe, but in a deeper logic of being, where value isn't measured by proof, but by presence. With the overwhelming mountain scale of problems and the diffusing of our misguided hope, we become disempowered, and we fail to see that we have power. We underestimate the quiet forms of power that we have at our disposal. And these aren't the forms that trend. They don't dominate headlines. They don't even make the headlines. But they are the heartbeat of all real change, in my view. The small daily actions, the subtle choices, the words spoken instead of silence, or the silence chosen instead of rage, the courage to live truthfully in private. This is small power. And it emerges from alignment, not from authority, from money or force. And it's the neighbor who shares food, who grows food and shares it. It's also the teacher who listens, as well as the teacher who resigns with integrity because the school can never be fixed. It's the local counsellor who still believes, who turns up. It's the friend who apologizes first, or the partner who tries to work on the relationship and give it all they've got, but accepts that they need to walk away. And these don't sound like revolutions, but they are. They really are, because they have a ripple effect. We forget how deeply connected we are, how one person's integrity becomes another's inspiration, how a single shift in tone can reframe an entire room. You may have seen this happen. Systems are made first by people, and people are shaped by presence, or the lack of it. Now, the world may be locked, yes, into a vast machinery, but your being actually isn't, or it doesn't have to be. There are still choices. you can still decide, still forgive, still extend dignity, still refuse to conform to the hardness that surrounds you. And we needlessly overlook this power. It's not flashy, but it is sacred, and it is from the higher self, because it's totally sovereign when based in authentic living, and in this way, it's an expression of spirit. Over time, the micro changes instigated by small power, the small refusals, and soft revolutions, they build. They do. They form networks of resonance. And slowly, the mountain shifts and they make a difference. But at the small scale, you see. Yes, sure. Sometimes they do stop wars. Sometimes they actually start them. But we're talking here about a different scale of being and shifts happening at a much lower scale of reality. It's easy to feel that spirituality has nothing to offer here, that talk of higher selves and cosmic consciousness is a kind of escape from the brutal facts of the world. And maybe sometimes it is. At least I can see that in the mouths of some people. It can be. But something deeper is also true. The spiritual path was never meant to be convenient. It was never about rising above the world, but about being more fully in it, with eyes wide open and heart even wider. Real spiritual growth happens slowly. It doesn't happen in workshops. It doesn't happen after you've read a book, but in the hidden heart and in the quiet spaces between the outward lessons. And the walk of this path takes a lifetime. And even then, you don't finish, you just deepen. There's always this deepening. But here's the thing, you don't need to be fully awakened to live meaningfully. You don't even need to know much about spirituality and different teachings. And you don't need to be perfect to make peace. You don't need to be enlightened to be able to forgive. If you made peace with a sibling or a friend, that's a spiritual act. If you refuse to escalate an argument, that's a transformation. If you let go of bitterness, even for a moment, then you have changed the atmosphere of your life. We might not reach the heights of spirituality we read about in this lifetime, but we can bring light into the places where we stand. And you know what? Sometimes that is more than enough. We can easily buy into a myth that real change has to be large, loud, and external. That unless it shakes the world, gains millions of followers or likes, or gets corporate sponsorship, or hits the news, then it doesn't count. But transformation rarely begins with spectacle. It begins in silence, in the shadow, in solitude. And it so often goes unnoticed. And systems change only when people inside them change. Institutions reform when individuals awaken. Yes, sometimes the time lag is longer than we'd like. Sometimes there are backward steps too, many of them, where things get worse. But often the change is never visible. We keep waiting for something to intervene, some great force to intervene or show itself, but perhaps it already has through and in you, and through your quiet refusal to not do the thing that this or that person in a position of power is suggesting that you do. So we need to let go of the glamour of big change, the belief that only revolutions count, because often it's the invisible revolutions that last, at least when it comes to our own being. And this doesn't mean that we shouldn't protest or demand justice, especially if that is your calling. But we can do so with an awareness that outer change must follow inner realignment. And sometimes the most radical act is to stay soft in a hardened world, or become firm when everything around you turns to mush. You might not be changing the world today, but you can become someone who can in every moment. And I think there's a quiet nobility in acting without proof, in choosing to live aligned with your truth, even when there's no confirmation that it matters. This is the hidden ground of spiritual maturity, to plant seeds you might never see grow. You see, we're wired for evidence. We want to know that our sacrifices yield results, that our work brings fruit, of course. But what if it doesn't, or not even in our lifetime? Would we still act? This is where deep integrity is born. In the space where you keep going, not because of reward, but because of love, because something in you insists that this is the way, even if no one follows, even if no one sees or hears. It's like tending a flame in the dark, right? Others may pass by and never notice, but that small warmth you've created may save a life one day. It may spark something unseen, and it may change and contribute to a current in the ocean of consciousness. And the more powerful and rooted this spark is, the greater its influence, whether it is seen or felt or not. And you can probably link this to something in your own life, something in passing that someone has said, an advert on a billboard that completely changed your life, or completely put you in a different direction, or caused you to be in a certain place at a certain time, which was transformational. The small things can and do matter. And you don't need proof to matter. You don't need a legacy for something to be real. The truth is, we rarely know the full impact of our being. We just have to trust that alignment is its own kind of magic. And like Mother Nature, it's like planting seeds in the world for all the animals and insects to enjoy without any sort of acknowledgement. To live without proof is not to live without meaning. It's to live by faith in the unseen dimensions of reality. And that may be the most powerful act of all. So yes, the mountain is large. Systems are enduring and power protects itself. But none of this is relevant to or undermining of our own power. We still have power. We still have choices. And they have meaning and import. They might not look like revolution, reach millions of people, or even a few hundred, or might not strike fear into the hearts of the powerful, compelling them to change course and make the world right. But this doesn't mean that they have no impact. The greatest impact they may have is that they transform your own being. And this itself is a change that changes everything and changes others, because you are a part of the world, and so the being of the world is then changed through you. So, if, like me, you sometimes look at what is happening with the world and think, this is inevitable, destruction, there's nothing we can do about it, don't forget all the things that you can do and how powerful they are, how meaningful, not only for yourself, but for the people around you. Thank you for listening. That's all for today. You have been listening to The Higher Self, dialogues from my higher self to yours. I'll see you next time, but for now, goodbye.